and welcome to another session of Barnes Denig's Do-It-Yourself SOC Reporting Readiness Preparation. I'm Robert Ramsay with Barnes Denig, and with Bryan Gayhart here, another director from our SOC team. Bryan, thanks for doing this with me.
Yeah, of course. Happy to do it.
Today, we're going to talk about, at a very high level, if someone says you need a SOC report, how do you know which one you need? We've got SOC 1 and SOC 2, we've got Type 1 and Type 2, and then we also have SOC 2 with these categories of security, confidentiality, availability, processing integrity, and privacy. And you might wonder, which one do I do? Bryan, how would you answer that question if somebody received a request for a SOC report and didn't know where to start?
Yeah, that's a great question. And oftentimes that's the hardest part is getting started, is figuring out, that SOC 1 versus the SOC 2 route. And I always go back, a SOC 1 centers around financial reporting. So I'm processing transactions for my customer that then impact their financial statements. So their debits and credits that they're recording, they're relying upon my controls in place in my system to make sure that they're getting accurate financial statements, right? So the debits and credits that flow through. And then you think about the SOC 2, so that's more around those trust services criteria that you mentioned: security, confidentiality, availability, processing integrity, and privacy. So that's kind of, I find those two avenues and then I figure out kind of where I fit in. And then from there, you can kind of go down the path of meeting the SOC requirements. Is that how you would start?
Yeah, that's very good. And then an example, so SOC 1 is payroll very often because you got to have salary expenses, and that's where those come from your payroll system. And then any cloud-based tool like Slack, which isn't generating debits and credits, but you want to make sure it's secure, they've got a SOC 2.
Yeah, I think from there then, right? So if you're in the SOC 1 path, you're working on control objectives, right? You know that it's around processing a certain type of transaction. But then if you think about the SOC 2 and the trust services criteria, how do you determine which of those to include? Oftentimes contracts just say, hey, you need a SOC 2, and it doesn't elaborate any further.
Yeah, that is a good question. I usually try to have a dialogue with our clients about their customers, their contracts, and their service. So data centers, security and availability are huge, sometimes confidentiality. And then processing integrity tends to be a kind of a category for other people. I have a friend who likes to say you could do one on popping popcorn if you wanted, and you could break down all the steps and you could say we're covering it with processing integrity. And then privacy, I usually say, is B2C, like business to consumer. So it's a little rarer since so many of these SOC reports are B2B reports. They're business to business. And confidentiality is important, that these businesses are keeping information confidential, but they don't have consumer data that they're worried about keeping private. And certainly a data center isn't dealing with their customers' privacy. They're dealing with confidentiality of their customers. Hope that makes sense.
No, that's perfect. And I think it's important then to realize that all SOC 2 reports include security, that's the baseline. And then the other criteria and categories get added on top.
That's a good point. That's why it's like that weird CC nomenclature, which is the common criteria, because you have to have it to have any of the others. That's great. Anything else with this whole SOC 1 and SOC 2 when you're introducing it to someone?
No, I think it just gets back to the contracts and the service being provided, and then you kind of figure out which path to go down.
And I guess I can say it again, we've said in other videos, the Type 1 is a simpler report and very often the first one you would issue. So if you were doing a readiness project, your goal would be to issue whether it's a SOC 1 Type 1 or a SOC 2 Type 1, and then subsequently the Type 2s would happen after a period of time you could test against those controls. Those numbers, we come back to those 1s and 2s every time. And occasionally
I think one thing that helps with getting started is probably if you can get your hands on a report from a competitor. It gives you an idea of kind of what you should be including in your report and what type of report you may need.
Yeah, that's a good point. Competitors really help because then you can see a lot about how they've decided to describe the environment, which may be kind of similar. Another good source is just that entity's vendor. So if they have a payroll provider or a data center, or they use Slack, they can go request those SOC reports and have something as a guide to say, oh, I see what this ends up looking like. It's not that hard, is it?
No, we can get there.
Right. Awesome. Well, thanks for your time, Bryan. And thanks to everybody who clicked and watched. Reach out, call, click, or subscribe, and we're open for questions and ideas for future videos.